Yo, this Jarvis Landry disrespect has just got to stop. This Jarvis Landry disrespect has gotten crazy. Jarvis Landry, for those of you who don't know, has been one of the most underrated wide receivers, I believe, in football for quite a while here. Because despite him having all the accomplishments, all the Pro Bowls, all the records, all the yards, all the touchdowns that he has accumulated throughout his career, people have either found a way to just not care or try to tear it down in one way, shape, or form, right? When he was in Miami doing these things, oh, well, he's only doing it because he's the only option and he's getting a ton of targets and it's not real production, right? That's what we heard when Jarvis was in Miami. And then when he comes to Cleveland, he's the number one option. He has a good year. Well, you know, that Baker was really spreading the ball. You know, Jarvis went. And then the next year when they bring in Odell Beckham, and this man, Jarvis, despite getting less targets, has a career year in yards, despite the fact that this man's been criticized for being the number one option, despite the fact that this man's been criticized for having a ton of targets. He did it with less. And then you use the fact that somebody else, OBJ, took targets away from him against him, which I feel like is kind of ridiculous at this point. And what I'm trying to say is that I am upset that Madden rated Jarvis Landry an 85. And I've just come to the conclusion after this rating that nobody knows how to accurately rate Jarvis Landry. So what I'm going to try to do today is exactly that. I'm going to try to figure out, by comparing Jarvis to some players who are ranked higher than him, where he actually belongs in this spectrum and in the conversation of top tier wide receivers. So let's jump into it. Real quick before we jump into this video, please don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell so you can be notified. Camp is supposed to be starting at the end of this month. So if you want to lock in for the start of the 2020 football season, hit that subscribe button and be notified so you don't miss a single thing. Okay, so there are some players who are ranked higher than Jarvis. Some of these aren't as egregious as others. You know, you got Stephon Diggs, who's a 92. You got Keenan Allen, who's a 91. But the one I just don't get, the one I think is egregious and the most egregious, and I know people are going to be like, well, you're a Browns fan. Of course you're going to be hating on this particular person. But I think if you just watch football unbiasedly or even biasedly, you would know this is ridiculous. And that is JuJu Smith Schuster, who, despite having a god-awful year last year, and Jarvis Landry having a career year, somehow landed 1 point above Jarvis Landry at an 86 overall. And that's not just ridiculous in Madden. Let's compare what these two have done since JuJu has entered the league in 2017. In that 3-year period, JuJu has put up some decent numbers, right? 2,895 yards with 17 touchdowns. Now, since 2017, those same 3 years with Jarvis Landry, well, he's put up 3,137 yards and 19 touchdowns. So not only was Jarvis better than JuJu Smith Schuster last season, he's been better than JuJu Smith Schuster for the last 3 years, done more, accomplished more, been a better player with less around him. Because let's not forget, JuJu Smith Schuster's best year was next to Antonio Brown. Jarvis has put up some formidable years with nobody opposite of him in Miami and in that first year in Cleveland. So I don't get this one. I get that JuJu gets overrated because he's popular. He has a YouTube channel, and you know, the people like JuJu, so they overrate JuJu. I get it. I'm not hating on that in any sense of the way, but I gotta call that out, right? JuJu Smith Schuster's an 86, and just for fun, let's look at what both these receivers did in 2019 and see if these two are comparable. Better yet, let's see if JuJu Smith Schuster deserves to be 1 point higher than Jarvis Landry after the 2019 that he put up. Now, JuJu Smith Schuster put up 552 yards as a number one wide receiver with 3 touchdowns. Now, if you want to look at his per numbers, he had 13 yards per reception and 7.9 yards per target. I bring this up for a very specific reason, but I'm going to bring that up just a little bit later. Now, Jarvis Landry, on the other hand, 1,174 yards, 6 touchdowns, 14 yards per reception, 8.5 yards per target. The reason why I bring this up is because people will argue that JuJu had a worse year, despite having these awful numbers. Like, Jarvis doubled him in almost every major category. Despite having these awful numbers, people will tell me that Jarvis Landry's numbers are inflated because he got a ton of targets, and JuJu's numbers are lower because he had bad quarterback play and low targets. First of all, Baker Mayfield wasn't an excellent quarterback last year by any stretch of the imagination. Now, is he better than the guys that Pittsburgh have? Absolutely. But also, the Pittsburgh fans who are making this argument, let's not forget that you try to come and tell me that Baker Mayfield's garbage, that Baker Mayfield's on par with Mason Rudolph, but yet somehow Baker Mayfield found a way to have two 1,000-yard wide receivers. Meanwhile, JuJu Smith Schuster out here putting up 552 with your mediocre quarterback play. So it tells me that you know the difference between what Baker Mayfield did in mediocre quarterback play. And also, if you're going to make a, well, if he had more targets, if he had more receptions, he would have had more yards argument, you have to also acknowledge the fact that his per target numbers, JuJu Smith Schuster's, are lower. His per reception numbers are lower than Jarvis Landry. So that argument honestly holds no water, especially since JuJu, it would be a lot easier for him to have higher numbers in that respect because he got less targets, but he didn't, and he still did worse, which tells you that JuJu Smith Schuster was not on the same level at all as Jarvis Landry last year, and definitely doesn't deserve to be any higher rated than Jarvis Landry at this point. It just really shows you how low they made Jarvis Landry's rating, because I don't think an 86 is terrible for JuJu Smith Schuster. I just think an 85 is really low for Jarvis Landry. So that's around the caliber of wide receiver that Madden has ranked him at. Now let's look at the caliber of wide receiver that I think he's at. Now we'll go to the highest in this tier, somebody who I think he's on par with, but just slightly below, and that's Stefon Diggs. Now, if we look at their numbers, both since 2015, because Stefon Diggs entered the NFL in 2015, you'll see that Diggs had 4,623 yards, 30 touchdowns, 12.7 yards per reception, while Jarvis has had 5,430, so more yards, less touchdowns, 27 touchdowns, and one less yard per reception. And if we look at their 2019, you have Stefon Diggs, who had 1,130 yards, 6 touchdowns, 18 yards per reception, and Jarvis Landry had the same amount of touchdowns, a little bit more yards, but less per reception. This makes a compelling argument that Jarvis Landry and Stefon Diggs are at least on the same level, because in overall production, Jarvis is a little bit better, but when you look at the per numbers, Stefon Diggs clearly has an edge. So I think Stefon Diggs at 92 is actually fair, that he should be rated at a 92. So I'm not really coming for Stefon Diggs' rating here. But Jarvis Landry, if you look at those numbers, should obviously be closer to that rating than he is to a JuJu Smith Schuster. Just look at the numbers. Just look at the averages. Jarvis Landry is obviously in that conversation of a wide receiver, which is the top 10 conversation of wide receivers in that whole Madden ranking hierarchy. Now, do I think Jarvis is one of the 10 best wide receivers in the NFL? I would make an argument that he's more in that top 15 range than he is in the top 10. But you can make the argument that he's a fringe in that conversation, so maybe a 9 or 10 guy. I don't think he's an upper tier guy. I don't think he has that level of potential, but I think he is one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. And if you look at somebody who I think should be around the same rating as Jarvis, and I think is kind of his analog in this way, it's Keenan Allen. Because if we look at their numbers since 2014, they're very similar. Now, Jarvis had more yards. Keenan Allen had 5,359 to Jarvis's 6,188. Then you look at touchdowns. Keenan Allen, 26 to Jarvis's 32. Yards per reception, 11.8 Keenan Allen. Jarvis, 11. And then yards per target, 8 for Keenan Allen, 7.2 for Jarvis Landry. So even numbers there. Jarvis has the advantage in touchdown and total yards, but Keenan has a very slight advantage in yards per reception with 0.8 and a 1 yard advantage in per target. So comparable numbers. We look at what they did in 2019, it's more the same. Keenan Allen had 1,199 yards, 6 touchdowns, 11.5 yards per reception, 8 yards per target. Jarvis Landry, less yards, 1,174, 6 touchdowns, so the same amount, 14 yards per reception, so a significant edge in that area, and then a slight edge in per target with 8.5 yards per target. So again, Jarvis Landry in 2019, which these ratings are based on, by the way, what they did in 2019, is clearly on the level of Keenan Allen, a 91 rated player. Now, I know a lot of you guys don't care about Madden. I don't blame you, but this is more about how Jarvis is perceived in the league, because it is clear to me that Jarvis is in that top 15 wide receiver conversation, but so often does he get thrown to the side and forgotten about. And I know Jarvis is not underrated in Cleveland football circles, especially among the diehard fans. We kind of really appreciate what Jarvis Landry brings to the table, but amongst everybody else, he almost gets forgotten about, and nobody knows how to talk about this man again. Now again, are there arguments against Jarvis like there is every other player? Obviously, you know, one of those arguments is that he had this career year in yards with OBJ on the opposite side of him. Now, that's an argument that I think tends to get a little bit tricky with how people use it, because people will use it and say that Odell got doubled and tripled all season, and that just left Jarvis Landry wide open, which is not accurate at all. Like, Odell was getting double covered for maybe the first 4 weeks of the season, but after that, people start to realize that Odell wasn't playing at the same level that he did in New York. He just wasn't there physically. He was clearly injured, so they didn't spend as many resources on that side of the ball. So it wasn't like Jarvis was just out here running free in those situations. But again, that's the narrative that people want to push out. It's also a funny narrative that people push out, right? Because people will say that Odell was triple covered all year, and that's why Jarvis was able to get his yards. And then if you go around and like, okay, well, then Odell must have had a great year last year, seeing that he got 1,000 yards in triple coverage while injured. They'll be like, no, Odell's garbage. Which honestly, that argument makes no sense, because it's not designed to make sense, right? It's just, they'll bring up Odell to discredit Jarvis, but then if you want to use that same information they used to discredit Jarvis to pump up OBJ, they'll tell you OBJ's garbage. It's just a bad faith argument at the end of the day. So yeah, did OBJ help Jarvis Landry? Yes, because even if you are going to take off the extra attention off of OBJ, you're still going to put your number one corner on OBJ. So Jarvis didn't have to deal with that. Now, a thing to note is that Jarvis Landry very rarely sees number one corners in how he plays and how teams move him around. So that can be an argument against some of his production, that he doesn't have to see number one corners all the time. But it's never, again, that argument's never used in a proper football context. Another argument against him is a stupid one, because people are like, well, Jarvis only has these numbers because of targets. And then if you actually look at Jarvis's production throughout the years, he's done more with the less targets that he's gotten in Cleveland than he's done with the tons of targets that he has gotten in Miami. And it just shows you that if you use Jarvis in a different way, he's so much more productive on a per target basis. So again, I don't really see that argument having basis. Again, there are legitimate arguments to say that Jarvis Landry isn't a top 10 receiver. And the main argument I would use is that since he does so much in the slot, he rarely sees the team's best corner, and that's where he gets his production from. Sure, but Jarvis gets double covered just as much as Odell did last season, especially once teams caught on that Jarvis was the more productive wide receiver at the tail end of the season. So any attempt to try to discredit what Jarvis did last season is just kind of falls flat. But that's why I think about Jarvis Landry's ridiculous rating in Madden, and what it kind of says about how people view him in the football world outside of the teams he's on. Do you think Jarvis Landry is underrated, or do you think he's overrated? Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.